for learning, I feel like I'm generally like a person that likes to self-teach, like I feel like sometimes the questions are just so specific. It's like hard to find someone who knows that answer. Thankfully these days, Facebook and all these other places for astrophotography have just been exploding. So it's like a lot easier to do that. But when I first started, even just 4 years ago, there was like relatively scant information on how to do this. And to be honest, like I'm not even kidding, I researched like what telescope to buy and like all the things that I would need to get started for literally like 6 months. Like I was on the internet like every day for like an hour or two, just trying to like figure out like, okay, what is the right telescope for me? What's the right camera for me? All these things. And it was really overwhelming. And essentially it's kind of come full circle for me in that I now work for a telescope company full time, and I'm trying to help teach newcomers to the hobby, all of the troubles that I went through and try to make it easier for them so they can start astrophotography on their own without so much of a hassle. So.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because like by the looks of it, it looks pretty daunting at first when you want to try to get into it. But it's crazy. And I want, like, can you go over like the processes real quick, like of where you go to and why, and also the setup procedure really?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal of, what I'm trying to do is called deep sky astrophotography. There's kind of two main categories of astrophotography. There's like planetary and solar systems. So that's like anything within our solar system. So that includes photographing the other planets, the moon, or even the sun. Yeah. Some people I know have even taken pictures of the International Space Station, like passing in front of the sun and stuff like that. Insane. But I'm kind of on the other camp of deep sky, where I like to photograph galaxies and nebulae and star clusters and other things that are outside of our solar system. So in order to do that, a lot of those objects are very, very faint, very super faint, so that like you really have to kind of push cameras well beyond their like recommended limits, I guess, to really even get an image. So, if you're a photographer, you may know that like if you're trying to take a photo of the Milky Way, you're going to be exposing at least for like, 15 to 30 seconds or something like that, in that ballpark. Yeah. And that'll get you a good photo of the Milky Way galaxy. If you're talking about some of the things that I like to photograph, it's on the total exposure time of hours. Oh, wow. To be able to capture some of the details that we do.
So that means like the camera has to just sit there for hours, like in one position?
Pretty much. So the idea is that a lot of cameras can't really expose for more than, 10, 20, 30 minutes before it starts to kind of lose quality. So what you really want to be doing is you take a number of long exposures, say, a few dozen or even a few hundred long exposures of anywhere from like a minute to 5 minutes or even 10 minutes each. Okay. And then you take all of those photos and then stack them on top of each other in software after the fact. So by doing that, it really reduces the noise and increases the overall detail. And that's what I mean when we're like exposing for hours. It's we're really shooting for a few minutes at a time, but just stacking a bunch of those photos on top of each other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then as for like the actual process, so essentially what it is you may have, be familiar if you've ever tried to take a photo of the Milky Way, that if you expose your camera for too long, the stars start to create lines in your image. And that's due to the Earth's rotation, right? Yeah. So the Earth is rotating all the time, 24/7. And when it's doing that, if you have your camera on a tripod that's moving with the Earth, the stars of space are going to appear as lines over a really long exposure. So the way we get around that is we use something called an equatorial mount in astrophotography. And essentially, in a nutshell, what this mount does is it moves in the same direction, or it moves at the same speed but opposite to the Earth's rotation, so it cancels out that movement of the stars, and therefore when your camera and the telescope or lens is pointed at a particular galaxy, for example, it can expose for a long time without any stars streaking or blurring through the image. So that's how we're able to do that.
Is that necessary for the other astrophotography you mentioned, of just like the moon and also like the sun and stuff like that, or only for deep space photography?
That's a great question, and you're onto something there. Yeah, you don't need to use a equatorial mount for lunar, like of the moon, or planetary of the planets, or solar of the sun astrophotography, just because they're all so bright that you can get away with using really short exposures, like, I don't know, 1/100th of a second, if not faster, for some of the objects. So yeah, thankfully you don't need to expose for as long, and you don't need to account for the Earth's rotation and all that. It's a lot easier doing planetary, I think. In a sense, it's also difficult in that regard too, but I don't know.